Welcome to Let's Go There, a podcast featuring a group of women with a wide range of life experiences in dealing with everyday challenges. We hope you will enjoy this episode.
In our previous podcast, Dr. Ava Kenneredzzi and Reverend Kim Backus explore coercive control that can at first be misidentified for romantic interest, love and charm. The following podcast explores physical abuse, which is often the last resort when all attempts to control the person have failed, or the person experiencing abuse decides to either leave the relationship or retaliate.
Hello, Kim.
Hello, Ava. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
Very well, thank you. And really looking forward to our topic today.
Likewise for me. Yes. So shall we get going?
Yes, indeed. Let's start.
Right. So today we're going to be talking about domestic abuse. We're continuing with our conversations on domestic abuse, but today we're speaking more about physical abuse. And most people associate domestic abuse with physical abuse. You know, they think that they can tell when somebody's experiencing domestic abuse because they'll probably have a black eye or they'll probably have very visible injuries. But what we know, that does happen, and it happens more in the past than it does now. But what we do know in terms of research and practice and in people's lived experiences is that, you know, people tend to bruise a person in a place where most people won't notice. Yes. So that means that that person, if they have a job, they can go out to work and the bruises might be covered. Not in all cases, but most of the bruises might be covered.
Yes.
And some of the things I wanted to touch on, which a lot of people don't tend to think about in terms of domestic abuse, are the extent of the injuries. So oftentimes with domestic abuse, the injuries the physical abuse can begin if it's, you know, in a heterosexual relationship when the woman gets pregnant, and the injuries will be focused on her belly or her womb and the growing baby. So for a lot of women, they can lose children, they can have miscarriages if they're abused and they're, you know, assaulted in that area, in that location of their bodies. They can get sexually transmitted infections if their partner is, you know, having sexual relationships outside of the relationship, which is also common as well. And thinking of the unborn child, the injuries to the unborn child. So when we think of injuries, we're thinking of broken bones. We are thinking of not just injuries for now, but that can become injuries for the future. And then all of this sort of psychological and emotional abuse that goes with, you know, having to recover from an injury. And then also what that means. It means lots of days off work if a person works outside of the home, and just, you know, a bit of a burden really. And oftentimes, you know, in terms of victim survivors or women, they are really trying to avoid things escalating to the extent that, you know, there's going to be the kind of physical, you know, the physical attack or physical abuse. And for a lot of women, the physical abuse sometimes come when they're trying to retaliate, you know, when they're speaking back. You know, sometimes it's just in relation to this pattern, this consistent pattern of coercive and controlling behavior. So I don't know what you think about any of that, and what you can share surrounding physical abuse in terms of domestic abuse.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, you're so right, Ava. Physical abuse can be very devastating, not only to your mind but also to your body. Physical abuse can, if we go as far as to say, can actually cause death, because the violence is so intense. It can cause you so much harm. it can involve things like scratching, biting you, and albeit, you know, this is quite unbelievable for a lot of people that's going to hear this, because it's almost like, does another human being do that to someone else? Yes, they can, and they do. And like with most physical abusive situations, it usually starts out with possibly just a slap or a push, and which most victims think, oh, it was no big deal, you know, he won't do it again. And then the push becomes even harder next time, and next time it's a slap. And then what happens is that it gets worse. It becomes a tirade of punches and slaps, forcing you to do things that you don't want to do, using weapons and objects to hit you with as well, and kicking you. And yes, you're right, Ava, when you said that some, women can be pregnant and be beaten as well and lose their child because of it. So it's quite devastating. And that, not only are you feeling, I guess, maybe totally in pain, but emotionally, it's destroyed you, because the person that you thought loved you has beaten you. And that's something that takes a long time to get your head around, because as a victim, you often make excuses. And the excuse would be, probably, I made him do it. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I know he likes me to be quiet at a certain time when he's watching TV, but I made a bit of a noise in the kitchen, and that sort of sent him over the edge. The beatings can become very severe, even to the point that you have to go to hospital. And broken bones, broken nose broken, all sorts of things that are physically noticeable on your body. And like you rightfully said, Ava, sometimes it's done so precisely, the beating, that it's done on areas of your body that are covered up. So if you do go to work or you go to church, it's not noticeable, because items of clothing can actually cover up the damage that's done to your body. It's quite a awful thing, because, and it's a discreet thing also, because if you're not noticing it on somebody, it could be your friend, a family member, or a member of your church, it's something that could be overlooked from weeks to months to years, and this is going on behind closed doors. And that's why I'm really glad to say that. That's why I'm glad that the Black Church Domestic Abuse Forum, when we do our training, is that we actually are bringing the awareness about domestic abuse, and so that people can start to see things and look out for the signs of domestic abuse, because it's just not the physical side of the things that you should be looking for. It's actually the emotional side of that person. They could be looking withdrawn. They could be sitting by themselves. They could be like, I don't want to talk to anybody. They could be looking quite afraid, especially when they're with their husbands, that they don't want to speak. They're not allowed to speak. They're not even allowed to make eye contact. And these are the things that we take for granted. And, it says in scriptures a lot about, what God says about violence. It says in Colossians 3, verse 19, husband, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. It's very clear there. Psalms 11, verse 5 says, the Lord tests the righteous, and his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. So it's very clear that God hates violence. So in effect, it's a very damaging form of abuse, not only on the body, but also on the mind.
And I wanted to touch on just a little bit, because I know that we reference women a lot in terms of who we're speaking about, in terms of who's been victimized. And that's really just down to the disproportionality in who gets victimized by domestic abuse,
Yes,
and who's
indeed.
recorded as victimized, and who reports domestic abuse. So it reflects that. But I also wanted to add that, you know, anyone can experience domestic abuse, really. Men can experience domestic abuse from their wives, girlfriends, partners. And, you know, that form of physical abuse might be pushing, biting, hitting, burning, um, and especially focused on their genitalia. And the difficulty with men when they are being abused is that, you know, the man will try not to retaliate, because if he retaliates, especially, you know, if his partner's a woman and he retaliates, then he could be seen as the abuser. And even if he reports the abuse to the police, because of the disproportionality of victimization within domestic abuse, and it tends mostly to be, you know, men against women, men abusing women, everybody's looking for that script. That's what they're focused on. So a man turns up and says he's being abused, he might be arrested, as it were.
Yes.
In thinking also about retaliation, what tends to happen when the person retaliates, so when women retaliate, when the man is hitting them, they can become even more badly injured. So in lots of research in the States, say with African American women, will tend to retaliate more in terms of domestic abuse, and they end up, you know, kind of really worse off in terms of physical abuse, but they might also be arrested. Yes. So it's a funny kind of thing, isn't it? You know,
It is.
how can a person respond when someone's being violent? Are you going to be even more injured, you know, if you
Yes.
do nothing, or if you
Yes.
retaliate? So it's weird. Um, it's a weird and very difficult and complex scenario to find yourself in. And also, it can also be a pattern. It can become your relationship pattern, you know. So in the beginning about the honeymoon period, I'm not too sure whether I touched on this. There's this study by Ava Lundgren, and she talks about switching hands. You know, the hand that's used to hit is the same hand that's used to stroke and comfort. And really important to understand in terms of physical abuse. You know, how can this person stay with somebody who's abusive? They stay with them because they love them, because they're their partner, because they're scared of what might happen if they leave them. So it becomes very, very complex. And this is why it's important that if people are experiencing abuse, to be able to go somewhere and see something that can help them to make those steps to get support. What we're also trying to do within the Black Church Domestic Abuse Forum is to get churches to have information around. So if people turn up to church, they can have access to this information. You know, similar to when you turn up to your GP, there's lots of leaflets lying around, and you can get some kind of support in a way that's discreet. You know, and I think that's really important to also speak about, is that when we're thinking of people being abused, we all need to be active. We all need to be active, as you were saying, Kim, to pick up on the signs, to know people are more withdrawn, because you might not be able to see the bruises, especially if a person's a regular attendee at church. You might not be able to see the bruises, but it's about us being more responsive to the people in our networks and the people in our churches, you know, to ask, how are you doing? To see whether there's an opportunity for us to help, to support, to help that person.
Absolutely. And I love what you just touched on in regards to the men as well, and men that are being abused. A lot of it as well for them stepping forward is very rare as well because of pride. It's, you know, it's this macho thing that men are not supposed to be in that situation. It's unheard of, but unfortunately, it is quite common today, and the numbers are rising in that arena. And just really quickly, that the honeymoon period, where you talk about, one hand can beat you, but the other one can stroke you. And also the fact that this is the most critical time as well, where they said that an abuser is often very remorseful with physical abuse afterwards and constantly apologizes for their behavior after they've calmed down, after they've realized what they've done. And then they just say, they're very sorry. And, and that accumulates.
Kim, we have to leave it there again.
Oh, yes, we do. We do indeed. We have run straight. This is such an interesting topic.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on physical abuse. Churches can address physical abuse in intimate relationships, with congregants being more vigilant to those who have become withdrawn, quiet, or avoid eye contact. Signposting support for physical abuse in churches sends out a powerful message of zero tolerance and facilitates access to services for both the victims and perpetrators. If you and your church would benefit from domestic abuse training, please visit www.bcdaf.org.uk/training. Further information can be found in the podcast description.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope you found it inspiring and insightful. If you have been affected by any of the issues raised today, feel free to contact the Association of Christian Counselors in your area. For more information about our ministry, please visit www.ntcg.org.uk/WDM.